Hi everyone, and welcome to Meet the Graduate, where we talk to graduates about their life post-uni and their experience in the world of work. Today we've got Max Elgot from HART UK. How are you today, Max?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Today we're going to talk to Max a bit about what his life has been like post-university and his journey in finding his career path. So, Max, let's begin by hearing a bit about you. Where did you go to university? What did you study? And when did you graduate?
At the University of Edinburgh, I studied history, so it's a 4-year course, and I graduated in 2019.
Amazing. So we're going to start off by talking about your first career steps after graduation and how you kind of decided what you were going to do post-university. So when you were in your final year, what did you think about life after university and getting a job, and how did you begin your job search?
Yeah, I think like basically everyone who's in their final year of uni and doesn't have like a career path in mind, doesn't really have a certain next step to go on. I was pretty worried. I think you kind of get a few months into the 4th year and you start to realize that like the real world's out there and you're going to have to get a job and find a way to make some money. I basically had no idea what I wanted to do, really. I think I'd done a bit of experience in kind of like the charity sector and in the third sector, but I was basically open to anything, which was obviously a positive in some ways, but also not really in many ways, because I just ended up applying to lots of different things, kind of thinking like, where will give me a job? Where can I get employment, basically, without kind of thinking it through that much.
Okay, cool. So having decided that you wanted to go into some kind of employment after university, but you weren't quite sure what, how many jobs did you end up applying for? And can you tell me a bit about the application process and how you found that?
Yeah, so I think I was quite lucky that I'd done my 3rd year, I kind of done 50% of my course already, and so kind of had that 50% in the bank. Whereas some of my friends who had done years abroad did their 4th year at Edinburgh was kind of like 100%. Like, this is literally all you get to do to prove what degree you're going to get. So I was quite lucky that I already had like a 2-1, and I kind of knew I probably wasn't going to get a first because I was kind of just outside like the range that would really be possible without working like impossibly hard. And so I kind of had that little bit of extra time and a little bit of cushion, and I still found that it took a long time, and it takes quite a lot out of you. So I basically ended up doing, I think I did 4 graduate like grad scheme applications, and the amount of like boxes they make you tick and like hoops they make you jump through is just like at times very overwhelming and very difficult, because you are nowhere near getting the job and you're nowhere near like seeing the actualization or realities of where you're going to be going, and so you're literally just filling in like document after document, like form after form of very basic things like your prior addresses and like where you've worked before, and you're not allowed to just submit a CV. And it's very like overwhelming and kind of like disillusioning, because it's just like, it's very dull ultimately, and it's not really the fault of anyone at those companies. They kind of need that information, of course they do, but it takes a lot of time, and I think especially when you're not experienced at doing them, it takes longer because you're very worried about everything you're doing. You want to make sure you're getting it right, but also it's completely new experience. I think by the time I'd done the last 2, I was doing them a lot quicker and kind of doing them a lot more like freely and openly, and not worrying about every single like word I was writing down. And the last 2 are the ones I got interviews for, because basically there is like a bit of an art to it, and there's a bit of an art to answering their questions exactly and kind of putting your best foot forward and showing yourself in that best light. But it took a lot of time, and basically I was doing it from Christmas until basically the time I handed my dissertation in, which was about April. And there were times where I would have to kind of like set days aside, or set afternoons aside, to not concentrate on uni work to do those applications. And that's me saying that from the point of view that I had that spare time and I had the time to kind of do that, where I'm sure a lot of people didn't, and I'm sure they managed to do it somehow. But you have to be prepared for it to take up a lot of your time and for it to be difficult and boring and overwhelming.
Perfect, thanks.
Yeah, so I basically ended up applying to, I think, 5 different roles. They're mainly grad schemes. I kind of thought, how am I going to get a job? I'll just Google like what are the top grad schemes in the UK, see what I can find. I'm sure that's what a lot of people do. I kind of knew about things like the civil service fast stream and Teach First, and then I kind of, whilst Googling and doing a bit of research, kind of found out about like the MI5 one and the detective fast stream. Um, and I also had a bit of a job offer from a friend from home. Like his dad runs a company kind of in sales, but I wasn't particularly keen on that. I didn't really want to move back to Leeds because that's where I was from before I went to uni. And so I kind of dismissed that one, but had those kind of 4 grad schemes I wanted to apply to. I think the big thing for me was that they take so much longer than you think they would to apply to them. And I kind of had a little bit more time because I kind of had less pressure on my final year at uni. But even then, like the applications take such a long time. You've got to tick so many different boxes. You've got to get basically as much information as they ask you in quite a short space of time, and that information is very bitty and it's stuff you don't really think about, and things like lost out about it all takes, and like you are obviously a long way from actually getting a job, and so you're doing these long applications kind of with no way of knowing that you're going to get anywhere near getting the job. Like you don't even know if you're going to get an interview or a training day, so obviously that's quite stressful. So I kind of ended up applying to 4 of them. I definitely got a lot better the more applications I did. I think the first 2 I applied to, I ended up getting back to the 3rd round and then being like moved out after that one. And then the last 2 I actually did get interviews for, but I didn't really do any practice, which I definitely should have done for some of those questions because they are very difficult and they are quite easy to kind of learn what they're looking for. So, but again, that just takes up that time. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure, especially with all the other stuff you have going on at uni, it can be really difficult to try and manage all your applications as well. So once you've kind of gone through the research process, you've done some applications, you've got some interviews. What job did you end up accepting, and how did you find this job and the kind of prospect of doing it?
Yeah, so as I said before, I kind of ended up getting 2 interviews, the one for Teach First and then one for the detective fast stream. I didn't really have that much interest in being a detective. I kind of just thought it sounded cool, to be honest. Don't think I would have enjoyed it at all. And so I ended up taking the Teach First one after the like assessment day, which I really enjoy, like really behind kind of the ethos of the company and what they were trying to do. And was quite interested in being a teacher. I know I'm not one of those people who like dreamt of being a teacher since like the day they first set foot in a school, and I hadn't really thought about it that much. But obviously, it was quite appealing to me that it was a job that paid money straight away. I could start in June. I kind of had that structure, and at the time, that like made the most sense for me because I didn't have anywhere else to really go. It was that or move home. I mean, I got my offer for Teach First very late, and so it kind of made everything a lot more difficult to think about because I had a far less time to think about it. I kind of got the offer in the middle of like finalizing my dissertation and starting to do revision for exams, and I didn't really know where I was going to go or what subject I was going to teach, but I kind of just took it anyway without those details, which I think was a mistake. But it just seemed like where else was I going to go? It seemed like the only option, and I didn't really have time to think about it.
Okay, cool. So you've accepted your job at Teach First, you're excited, you're ready to go into the world of work. Can you tell me what your first impressions of teaching were, and how did you begin to realise that this job might not be for you?
Yeah, so it was a bit of a strange one. I think with something that's vocational like teaching, it's just like a matter of experience and kind of getting to know the reality of it. I think people kind of have a version of teachers in their minds of like teaching, which to be honest, I had, and it's completely different to what being a teacher is like. So we started with basically 5 weeks of training, what they call Summer Institute. And that was very theoretical, kind of learning like the philosophy of teaching. Our experienced teachers with you the whole time. I mean, I enjoyed the training really. I thought the like philosophy was very interesting, and the couple of weeks I spent teaching in this like very like model school was very enjoyable, as you would expect. I think that added to kind of idea about teaching I already had in my head that was like, oh, I'll be like the fun, nice history teacher who deals with like very few like difficult situations and just like does like lovely lessons that everyone engages with completely. I mean, I think that was obviously pretty naive. Speaking to any teachers, that's not how it works. But so as I said before in one of my other answers, I didn't really know where I was going to be going until very late, and so I got a school which was basically in Kent rather than in London. I mean, it was obviously in the advertised area for London, and so it was obviously not really anyone's fault, but I hadn't really thought the kind of logistics of that through, or kind of like the realities of it through, until I went. And then like first couple of days before I started, I kind of had like staff induction and stuff, and basically it was like an all-girls Catholic school in Kent. I'm obviously not from the area. I'm not Catholic. I'm obviously not a girl. And so it was quite a shock because I obviously hadn't been to an all-girls school. I didn't go to a faith school or anything like that. And so the reality of the situation I found myself in was completely different. And I think there was like an inkling of doubt straight away when I arrived to this completely like alien place full of people that I didn't really have that much in common with, and the fact that they were there and like willing to be taught. I think the more time I spent in a classroom and found out the realities of, oh, actually like 45 hours of your working week are going to be admin or chasing up stats for a spreadsheet and stuff like that, and then 15 hours are going to be teaching, where you actually get to impart knowledge and talk about things you're passionate about. And I found that very difficult, and like the more I went through it and the more I stood up and taught, the more I thought, this doesn't really suit my personality, it doesn't really suit kind of my strengths, really, like having to be like constantly on and constantly like so patient and like willing to kind of like go the extra mile without any form of like reciprocated like congratulations or help or whatever, because I was like, it was a very different and difficult job to do, and it just didn't really fit in with the realities I thought the job would entail.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a common situation for graduates who kind of go into jobs and then have a real difference between what they expected the job to be and actually the reality of being in that job role. So after you kind of had this initial gut feeling and experienced the job for a while, could you talk to me a bit about when you decided it was time to leave teaching and how that kind of made you feel?
Yeah, so I think I basically knew by about November, so obviously started in September, that it just wasn't for me, and that I'd thought about the ways that I could kind of like last the 2 years or kind of change the situation, might make it better or something like that. But I came back to Leeds, kind of like back to my family home for the half term in around November. And I basically came home, everyone I spoke to was like, what's wrong with you? Like, what's happened to you? Like, you seem completely different to who you usually are. I think I was genuinely just like irritable and like quite down about everything, because just like working a job that you do and you have to put a lot of hours into and like commute a very long way to get to, and you know isn't right for you, is like very, very difficult, and it's very tough on basically everything. And it is the reality, whether you like it or not, that the job you do, if you work there 5 days a week, is going to be your entire life. And because you spend like 80% of your time at work, you need to be fulfilled and you need to be happy in what you're doing, because even when you come home, it's very difficult to separate, oh, I don't like being at work, I'm upset at work, that kind of feeling. You can't just switch that off straight away, and I think that's very difficult. And I'd always kind of thought whatever job I wanted to do, I didn't want it to make me miserable. I didn't want to be miserable for such a long time and kind of like just be counting down the days for it to end, because I wouldn't be a good teacher and I wouldn't be doing well for myself or for the pupils or for the people I was working with. And so I think after a few like long conversations with friends and family and kind of thinking about the options, I took the decision basically based on their advice and what I was kind of feeling and had been feeling for a long time, that actually sometimes there are things you just have to kind of give up on and kind of just like reassess and put it down to a lack of experience or having to kind of change to suit the world of work, but also suit your own needs. And I think that's like very important, and would be a message I would stress to everyone, is that you don't have to do a job you hate. Like, I understand the pressure because I had the job, and then you kind of like, the only other option I had was to be unemployed. And that's obviously absolutely terrifying. And it's like, why would you throw away a good opportunity to be on a good grad scheme that everyone's proud that you're on and that they're happy you're doing and is making you like decent money? Why would you throw that away? But I think ultimately your happiness and like your engagement with the job and satisfaction is more important than that.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think it's really important for students and recent grads to hear and know that, you know, if you don't enjoy the job you're in, it's completely fine to move on and find one that's better suited to you. So let's move on to talk about something a bit more positive. Could you give me a bit of information about how you found your current job and the kind of journey that you've taken to reach where you are today?
Yeah, so as I said before, I think I'd done a lot of internships, kind of work over the summers in the third sector. So I'd been to the Red Cross a couple of times. I'd been to a couple of smaller charities as well, kind of like 3 or 4 week internships and like volunteering things, trying to get that experience. And I'd always enjoyed that. I'd kind of worked in lots of different departments. I'd worked in communications where I work now, but I also got to work in the archives at the Red Cross. I got to work in kind of like advocacy, which has been a very interesting experience as well. And I kind of knew that I wanted to go into the third sector and kind of like campaigns and comms at some point. But obviously I kind of put that on the back burner to focus on teaching and focus on the grad scheme, place to go back to, because that's where I knew I had experience of enjoying it and wanting to kind of put in the extra yards and feeling the satisfaction of what I was doing, even when I was doing the stuff in internship, especially when I was still at uni, that for most people I'm sure wouldn't have been particularly interesting or like enthralling, but I was still enjoying anyway, because that was all I was basically qualified to do anyway. So thinking about that, I kind of started researching what kind of roles were out there. I looked at a few roles through kind of like graduate recruiters, which were a bit less in that sector, and kind of just had some bad experiences there. Kind of like got to stages where maybe I would take the job offer and kind of saw that there was the kind of like path that I didn't want to be in, an industry that I had no interest in. I didn't really want to be taking a job again just because I thought I was obliged to, or because it would kind of put an end to a job search, however much you want that to happen. So basically I ended up going and researching basically third sector jobs. I got a couple of interviews, but I ended up being passed over really because I didn't really have the experience they were requiring. And I think the other candidates they were employing in the end probably had like a year, 6 months more experience than the minimum. And so I think the more that happened to me and the more I kind of researched and read like blogs about people who worked in jobs that I wanted to do and worked in the industry that I wanted to be in, the more I kind of saw that the reality of it is you basically have to do like however months of however many months of an internship before you'll get the job or before you'll get that experience. I mean, I think at the time I found that very discouraging in a way, because it's kind of like, well, you are advertising a graduate role and you want experience. I think now, like a few months in, I kind of see that you do kind of need the experience, and why would an employer take someone who's got no experience whatsoever, hasn't really proven that they're willing to put in the yards and like willing to do some of that work that obviously isn't particularly well paid or not paid at all, when lots and lots of people are, because it's a very competitive sector. So I started applying for internships. I started applying for some paid internships as well. And basically the first people that got back to me were my current role, and it was in fundraising, and they would pay kind of my way into work and my way back and for my lunch. But I was lucky enough to have savings from my last job, because I knew basically I could save a couple of months rent and save a couple of months kind of like living expenses, because I knew early that I wanted to leave. And so I was privileged enough and lucky enough to kind of have the time to do one of those kind of like lesser paid, unpaid internships using my own savings and a bit of help, and kind of took the decision to take like a 3-month internship, which I did, which was in fundraising. And that was probably about 3 weeks before the coronavirus kind of locked everything down. So I was kind of obviously thinking that I'm never going to get a job in this sector for a long time. So the best thing to do is to keep working at the internship. And the more I worked at it, the more I enjoyed it. And the more I enjoyed it, the better quality of work I was doing. I was working past like contracted hours. I was working past like kind of the feelings that everyone gets at work of like boredom and kind of like frustration at certain things, and kind of just like getting more and more into the idea of what it was like to be in that role. And the more I was doing that and enjoying it and engaging with it and kind of like reading around the subjects that I was working on and like reading around the topics after work and stuff like that, I think obviously the better I was at the job. And so I got the experience, I kind of made the connections in my workplace. And because the standard of work was so much better and they could clearly see I was interested in working, that kind of led to me being offered a comms role, which kind of came free because I'd taken over the comms side during my internship as well, because of kind of like the turbulence of everything that's been going on. I think that kind of like really reinforced to me that it's not a linear job progression for anyone. Like I would have never have imagined that I would have this role that I have now. And I was basically told in my internship, you can do this for experience, but there's no roles available here. And we can't promise you that we'll go into anything from here. And so I never really expected it to happen. And so I'm sure I was lucky in a way to kind of fall into the right place at the right time. I think it just really shows that it's not just going to be like a straight line of your career for most people, and that opportunities kind of arise out of that. And if I hadn't have taken that step to volunteer and intern and been lucky enough to take the time to kind of work and get experience unpaid, then I wouldn't have the role I have now.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's so important to not think about the end goal, but just think about the next step, because like you said, so many times you'll take one step and it will lead you somewhere that you didn't even think it could. So that's super important for all students and for grads to know. You've touched on it a bit there, but I was wondering if you could give us a bit more information on how you compare your current role to your first experience with the working world, and how you would kind of compare your feelings around this job and starting this job and your feelings around starting your old job in teaching.
Yeah, so I think a big thing for me that I think I've learned, and obviously it's only been about really like coming up to a year now, I think the big thing for me is that you need to find a job, and it sounds stupid, that you don't hate. And like it seems very obvious, but like there is a huge difference between a job you can tolerate and a job you can see interest in and find. Maybe you don't wake up every morning thinking, oh yeah, great, I get to go into work wherever, but you think you don't wake up and have that like sense of dread that you're having to go in and work a job that you literally can't stand, because that is just, it's just bad for everyone involved. It's bad for your employees, it's bad for the person that you're helping, it's bad for you mentally and physically and basically in every way. That if you dread and hate something you do 80% of the time, that is just such a difficult way of living. And so I think that's kind of that ended up where I was feeling what I was feeling, not really through anyone's fault but my own, and basically just making a few bad decisions and ending up in a job that I just really didn't like. And I would warn people that that's very easy to do with some of the more like vocational roles that are out there. And so like teaching, being a lawyer, being a doctor, whatever, I think do your research, do your experience if you can, before you take a job and before you make those commitments, because what I learned is contracts are actually far more complex than you might think. And so they don't really care about your feelings in that regard. And you've made that kind of like legal obligation. So if you get into a vocational role that you hate, you also have to be prepared to stick at it before you can even quit, which is a very difficult situation to live through. And personally, it was a pretty terrible like few months for me. But I think the big thing is just the quality of work you do when you enjoy something. Like I work in my current job, I'll work after work to make sure that the social media posts look good, or to make sure that I've got an email to someone that maybe is in a different time zone because their working hours aren't done, but mine are. And I still want to make that good, and I still want to put in the extra effort. Like I never really believed after my first experience people would actively stay at work and like work another couple of hours because they want the job to be done well and they care about it. Because my first experience was that it wasn't enjoyable and that I didn't like it, and that I wanted to leave as soon as possible, to be honest. And then I found myself like a few days ago basically working like 2 extra hours on like a social media campaign. And I always thought that was kind of like an idea that people kind of fed you to make work seem like more bearable and easier. That they'll be like, you'll find something you love and you'll just stick at it and you'll work through it and you'll work past your hours you want to like achieve and do well and take pride in it. And I obviously wanted that, but I just didn't really think it seemed like a reality at the stage I'd been at with my experiences. And so like finding that is obviously like a huge relief, but it's also kind of like a bit of a moment for you where you're like, oh, actually maybe like working here is exactly where I want to be. And actually like the idea of work compared to uni, which is obviously really, really fun and usually not full of too many responsibilities, you kind of think that, oh, maybe that's going to be like the best time ever. But actually when you find a job that you love and you really want to do, it becomes kind of like a comparable different way, that like sense of achievement that you wouldn't get at uni. And you kind of see that why people enjoy their work and why people say those things. So I think it's that enjoyment kind of leads to you doing well. It leads to you feeling happier. And I think it leads to kind of better job opportunities and better progression and different opportunities arising because you're willing to do the extra work and work hard and produce things of like quality and quantity, which you wouldn't in a job you hate.
Yeah, completely agree. I think there's such a correlation between enjoying your job and being good at your job. And I think the more you can find enjoyment at work, the better you'll do at work. You've given us loads of really important advice, but is there any kind of parting wisdom you want to leave with our students and recent grads?
Yeah, I think you just have to do what makes you happy, and you have to do things that you think you are going to be good at and going to enjoy. And I think it's very easy to kind of like bow to pressure from your parents or your friends, or kind of like the idea that people around you will have jobs and people will start doing careers that they enjoy straight away. And that's a reality. And you might feel like less than them, or you might feel, oh, it's never going to happen for me. And because it's a different like phase in your life, and you're kind of transitioning from student to kind of like working adult, and that brings with it like a lot of different experiences and a lot of difficult feelings, and it's obviously a bit of a turbulent moment for you. So I think kind of like trust in yourself that things will probably turn out all right, and try not to like bow to the pressure and do things that you know you don't want to do, or kind of like you take roles you know you don't want to do or have doubts about, if you can possibly avoid it, because ultimately your career is going to last like 30-40 years, and maybe you might have to have like a few months that aren't so great, which happened to me, but ultimately there is like a light at the end of the tunnel, and you will come out the other side as long as you kind of like stay true to what you want to do.
That's great advice. Thank you very much. So that's all from us today. Thank you so much, Max, for joining us and telling us your story. And all students and grads watching, please remember to follow Job Teaser UK on YouTube for the replay of this live stream, and follow us on Twitter at Job Teaser UK to keep up to date with all our upcoming events. We've got loads of Meet the Graduates and Meet the Experts planned. So thanks for tuning in, everyone, and I hope you all have a great week.